So I'd like to welcome everyone to our monthly get-together. As a reminder, this is our creative meeting where we aim to provide a collaborative forum to share ideas, concepts, and theories for all those interested in research and remote viewing to support members in their project development. All are encouraged to attend, whether brand new to remote viewing and research or highly experienced. So if you have some friends with similar interest, I'd like to encourage you to invite them to our next meetings. Most of you here have joined the previous meetings, but as a reminder, our first guest speaker this year was Dr. Daching Piao, who came to us from Oklahoma State University and gave us a wonderful introduction to his methodology on scoring remote viewing sessions. And I hope that we get the opportunity to test this out in the future. Our second guest speaker was Diane Trussell, who joined us from Australia. Diane had 16 years background in neuroscience, and she presented a really fascinating conceptual model on non-local consciousness. And today we are pleased to have Dr. Rodrigo Montenegro, PhD candidate, Master of Science in Neuroscience, and sleep medicine specialist. And he is coming to us from France in the Psi lab. Our subject today is, can the brain-computer interface enhance Psi-Abilities? And this is going to encompass the waking and sleep states, including remote viewing. The synopsis that we have for today's presentation: from the onset of electroencephalography research to the incredible advances of brain-computer interface, Rodrigo's presentation lays out the direction of such technologies are taking, looking at mind-reading devices, brain-computer controlling devices, brain synchronization under healing, lucid dreaming induction, and more. And we'll look at how BCI tech may evolve to provide insights into Psi and guide and develop Psi-Abilities. Rodrigo, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Again, welcome everyone. I see we've got a few more people joining in. Deborah, I think if it's okay with you, I'd like to go ahead and make you the administrator for the meeting, since I'm going to have to drop off at the top of the hour. And
yes, that's fine.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right. And then Rodrigo, if you'd like to take it away, I'm going to go on mute. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Thank you. My name is Rodrigo Montenegro. I am a PhD candidate in neuroscience, and I've been working with neuroscience in the past 5 years. I have a startup that is called the Gamma Wave Technologies, where we have developed a headband with, the objective to try to measure non-ordinary brain state or non-ordinary states that could be developed through headbands or BCI. And I put that quote from William James because I think that's, generally speaking, the condition that is very important for us in terms of our species to try to develop and try to enhance our abilities to induce non-ordinary states of consciousness. And I'm currently working with, the IRVA lab, which is a lab in Lorraine University. I'm Brazilian myself, but I am currently in France. I was working in the lab as well in Liège. And I'm also the founder of the Psi, the Sleep Consciousness Institute, that has the objective to train people to do out-body experience. I have had my own experience since I am 19 years old, and I have, studied those phenomena since then with the objective to understand them better. And since 2016, I decided to shift my career to study back. I did neuropsychology, then neuroscience. I did neuromodulation medicine, and then neuroscience, and then I studied at Oxford sleep medicine. So without further ado, I will start talking about, what are those brain-computer interface, and if they can enhance really, Psi-Ability and ESP really speaking. And here when I'm talking about Psi-Abilities, I will, be taking the world has, broadly as one can be, talking about, the perception of the biofield, the perception of, remote viewing, out body experience, and all those things. And so we're mostly going to talk about BCI and other types of technologies. Like, for example, we have, Lucia, Pandora lights, that induce, altered states. We have different types of hemisync device that can also induce altered state, but those are not BCI. And of course, we'll not discuss about the reality of Psi or, non-ordinary states or, the possibility of psychic perception. We'll take for granted that they exist. And so one of historically speaking, what is really interesting is that EEG, electroencephalography, was started by this guy here, physician Hans Berger, who was a German guy, and he developed the first EEG in 1924. And the interesting bit is that he was trying to peer into the mind. It was not trying to look at the brain itself. It was the objective that is often overseen is that he was trying to understand what was happening in the mind of the person. And that was brought by the fact that he had a very interesting experience, a telepathic experience with his sister that was at the time about to fall in from a horse, and he perceived this, clearly. And so he wanted to see if we could measure that, the psyche, basically. And so this is often something that is not that is overseen in EEG. And certainly, as you can imagine, he wasn't really looking at the psyche at all. He was looking at the brain patterns, the electricity that the brain produced. And so we can ask ourselves, okay, so from then, from that moment, from the onset of EEG, electroencephalography, can today's device be peering into the mind through those type of device, through EEG or BCI, brain-computer interface? And so here I was just putting an example here of that device that is quite interesting. They received a lot of money, I believe, from Facebook. And basically this it's a little device that measures occipital activity on the back of the brain, and that is able really to measure our thought between bracket. Because as you can see here in the picture that you can see here, you see that this person is able to control the laptop entirely without using his hand, without using any commands. So only with that device, the person is able, through what we call the P300 ERP, which is event-related potential that is associated with decision making and visual stimuli, and only with that, this device is able to control the device is allowing us to control a laptop. And it's really kind of sci-fi-ish, if I can put it that way, because it's really like bizarre that the person is able to control the entire computer only with his mind. And so of course here we are not this device is not peering, is not looking into the minds, the psyche of these people that are using those devices, but really we are starting to see that those devices can really read our thoughts in a certain way, because we can control a device. But what is really more up to date and really interesting and more associated with remote viewing here is that we have today some incredible technology that is associated with AI, artificial intelligence, and so basically here what you see is that they have trained an AI to basically look at patterns of within a fMRI, a functional, MRI machine, where they were like trying to, they were looking at how individuals during more than 20 hours of brain encoding of fMRI and decoding from the AI to try to look at signals from the perception. So basically participants were shown about 1,000 pictures during 20 hours within, when they were inside an MRI machine. And so you have the AI that is starting to decode this pattern, and then the AI only with, the presentation of visual stimuli that you can see here is able to reconstruct. So that's basically a 4-step kind of condition. So you have, the presentation of image during 20 hours in different subjects. The AI is going to look at the brain patterns of the images, and then only looking at the brain activities of through visual stimuli, the AI can reconstruct the perception. And this is very, very interesting because we have a 48% match here. So we are really starting to look at, of course, again, the brain. But what is more interesting for, what is for our field of, research into remote viewing is that mostly the matches are associated with color and shapes. So, and those are the things that when we are having, for example, in remote viewing sessions, in controlled remote viewing sessions, we are not looking at really defining an object. We're looking at shapes, we're looking at color, and maybe this kind of technology will be implemented in the future, because some people say that this is going to be transferred into EEG technology. So we are going to be able to do this with EEG soon enough. And so here, what's really, really interesting is that we have a very complex system, and that is perceiving the perceptions that we have when those perceptions, for example, we see here in the second images here, we have different subjects here that have different patterns. There are different eras and different patterns that are associated with their perceptions. There are individual perception. And so this is very complex because it's not only an objective stimuli that is perceived, but there is an underlying perception of the person that is correlated to that objective perception. And the AI is able to reconstruct that. And also because it's even more complex because as we can see in the second picture, the processing of the visual stimuli are not exactly entirely the same amongst individuals. So it's very interesting because maybe one day we will be able to do this with remote viewing and able to reconstruct what people are perceiving. And so going a little bit further than this is like saying if we achieve a condition where we are able to do this with electroencephalography rather than a complex, multi-million, machine like, the fMRI, maybe we will be able to achieve a condition that we cannot achieve today, which is to train to induce non-ordinary states. And so really the question is, if there are any BCIs or headbands today that can do this. And there isn't. There isn't. That's a fact. We have, like, for example, those devices here. There are 3 devices today in the market. They are headbands. They are quite good, but they only develop, or they only help you to enhance your focus, your concentration, your relaxation, and so on, but not non-ordinary state. And I was like putting those images here of the Star Trek franchise, because that was really interesting for me when I saw the first time that that episode that was aired in 1971, where they were using some kind of tech and really headbands to increase their intelligence and to increase their ability to perceive things. And the idea is really, can we do this with non-ordinary state? Can we do this to achieve and enhance our ability to do that? And so those devices, they do help with some things, but they don't help with specifically conditions like remote viewing or out body experience. And so this is the device that my company is currently working on. And one of the things that is really different here with what we are doing is that we are benchmarking your ability against the ones that we see in professional, in this case, meditators here. And this is important because it allows you to measure against the persons that are achieving better. And in this case here, of course, those are 3 types of meditation where we see, long-term meditators achieving specifically gamma wave. But gamma wave is really interesting to look at and to understand, because, for example, gamma wave is reported during perceptions of, eureka moments, like, for example, when you have intuition. And so that's interesting because there are some studies that shows that people who have greater expertise or greater time with those meditation that specifically induce gamma wave, they seem to be able to perceive the subconscious better. And some suggest they are also able to achieve presentiment or presentience. And so, of course, those are the states that maybe are associated with the intuition or the perception that we may have, during remote viewing. And so, so that's the idea here is like, we can benchmark, we can use BCI to train, we can use maybe BCI to help us with non-ordinary state and inducing non-ordinary state. And so that's another type of thing that I have been doing research with, is a state that is called, the vibrational state, that I am, proposing, that is a DMT or dimethyltryptamine, endogenous dimethyltryptamine type of condition. And that's a state that is brought up by, intense focusing into, our body, and specifically working with, some type of energy, and that has a very similar type of electroencephalograph than it's perceived during the DMT state. And that state is so specific, is so interesting, that when we are looking at, for example, those states here of, meditation, what we see is that we have like 60 hertz. We can achieve those meditators, long-term meditators of, 15, 20, 25 years, they achieve like 60 hertz, 80 hertz, a little bit more. But here in that type of meditation, we are able to achieve like up to 240 hertz. And let me see here if I can bring up the, normally there is a little video here. Okay. So what you can see here, tell me if you can see the video. It is not showing?
It doesn't appear to be moving at the moment.
Okay, so
now
here
it's moving.
Yeah. So what you see here is that you have a 1 minute rest. The protocol was a 1 minute, rest, a 1 minute where the person induce, that kind of, vibrational state, which is the kind of meditation inspired by Tibetan tradition. And then you have 1 minute, to look at. And so here you see the person is achieving. So you have like, the resting state here that you can see. And then the person, you'll see at 60 seconds, the person will start, to do that. And so the person here achieved that state approximately, at that time there, that was shown approximately here. Well, hold on a second. So a little bit, we'll stop there approximately. So you can see here, there was an increase in delta activity of up to 400% across the brain. And we have here activity of increase of, more than 100% of activity. And so again, that's another state that just show, that we can, achieve, non-ordinary states in different ways and in different, kind of, conditions that are quite, interesting. And you can see here that was a 128 EEG study, and we are continuing with, a 256 EEG study, where we can see people achieving like, 240 hertz. So if we can train those, states that are all altered, non-ordinary states, this previous state actually, I didn't mention that, but this is associated with, sleep. So this is perceived spontaneously during different people can induce it in the waking state that you can see here, but this is also perceived in the REM state spontaneously, and this is also perceived in non-REM state. And we can see that the Tibetan tantric traditions, they try to induce this in REM and non-REM state. But what about RV or remote viewing training? And so here is where we have a problem, because we don't know what's happening in the brain of the people who have remote viewing, and that's really an issue today in the field. So I've put a few data here that are quite interesting in terms of the studies. They are old studies, they are very limited in terms of not only the amount of subjects, but also in terms of the technology that was used, and there was a few methodological issues, but anyway, it gives us a certain direction of where we could start to develop some type of headband or some type of BCI to be able to train individuals, if we would of course know a little bit better. So here the first study here was a study by Targ that was showing alpha blocking in. They had like two kind of a receiver and a sender, and they were pointing some flashing lights to the sender, and they wanted to see if the receiver, and that's the EEG of the receiver, that's the occipital area of the EEG of the receiver, if by pointing a flashing light to the sender, the receiver would pick that up visually, right? Because occipital area is associated with visual perception. And so what we see here is that we have this alpha blocking that is perceived here during different moments where the sender was receiving some lights. And so that's quite interesting, because it shows that there was a kind of perception associated with that in the occipital area of the receiver, and so of course this is why we use blinding, and but it's still it's still very interesting that that condition had occurred, but of course this wasn't replicated. But this is another study that was by Roll that was also quite interesting, because it shows that there was an increase in occipital alpha during moments where there were higher details that were correct through the different atoms, right? And so, but what was also very interesting is that there was, those superimposed beta bursts here at approximately 100 to 400, milliseconds in temporal and frontal region. And so my perception is that this is possibly those conditions where in CRV, we have the person making notes or thinking about exactly what the person saw, right? But that's also interesting because it gives us a little bit of clues that it's associated with visual perception, right? But here we have a study by Persinger that was the study that they did on swan. And so that's a little bit different because they were saying here, 7 hertz, occipital spike. So it's more theta wave. And so that's the kind of thing that we need to study, that we need to look at to be able to do, more research into, what are the conditions, what is the neurophysiological correlates, the characteristics of the brain, the temporal characteristics when the person is doing, or when in a CRV kind of a condition, the person is making notes, and what are the conditions that are really, interesting for us to be able to understand and train, maybe, people, better. And so I'm just going to show that other study here that is quite, interesting, because in the same way that Dart was showing, how, the brain of the receiver and the brain of the sender were, kind of not synchronized is not the case, but they were, there was a correlation through, the flashing. Here we see, for example, synchronization of the brain of 2 people that were not looking at each other, so they were not using mirror neurons. Normally, when we are facing a person and we look the person into the eyes, generally we tend to increase phase synchronization. So there is, a synchronicity of, brainwave and patterns that normally happen through, mirror neurons. But here in this case, the 2 people, the 2 person, the healer and the healee, they were not, perceiving each other. And so here they were using 2 EEG, 2 set, and this is why we call, hyperscanning. We use, hyperscanning when we are measuring the brain waves of, different people in a same, protocol. And what we're seeing here is that synchronization, right? And so that's interesting because, of course, that's the kind of thing that maybe we need to avoid, and we need to between, the sender and, the receiver. But okay, but what has been done so far in terms of, the kind of BCI that we could use, to stimulate different, non-ordinary states. And here, for example, I'm sure they have heard of those, the God's helmet, the Shiva headset. They were used, to try to study different kind of, religious and mystical experiences. And some people would report, all body experience. And other were perceiving, sense presence and other types of things. And that's what led to the notion of, the temporal parietal cortex, or the TPJ, was associated with, the paroxysm of, the TPJ were associated with non-ordinary state. And my company, we developed a low intensity, or what's called a LITMS, which is a fraction of, a Tesla, to do the same. But this didn't work so well, because it was heating up, a lot, and specifically hitting the brain, and people were having kind of a little bit of a headache. So we developed other types of technology for using photobiomodulation that works really well. And that's what we are doing here with Psi, my institution. We are, offering people with, the ability to perceive what it is like to have those kind of, perception when we are going out of the body. But of course, again, we are not able to at the present moment, from those experiments, we were not able really to induce the out-body experience. There was only one person that was able to induce that. But what is more interesting is that the type of technology that we are using. So we are using different types of electrical patterns. Some of them are force the brain to behave in a certain way, and some others, they are only going to work, or they are going to influence the brain when there is an activity in the brain that is corresponding to the area where we are stimulating. And so we can train the person to achieve a better state, or a better non-ordinary state through this. And we had some interesting experience, sensation of shifting out of the body, sensation of loss of perception of the body, which is, of course, very specific to out-body experience. But maybe with time we could develop this kind of things to do it with remote viewing. And so what we have done as well, we have replicated a study with by Voss and all, stimulating lucid dreaming. And so I thought it was interesting to mention that, because I was looking at some of studies that were done in remote viewers, who they are, what they do, and I was surprised to see that people use the people that work with remote viewing. 25% of them apparently use dreams to induce remote viewing, and that's, for me, it's a little bit it adds complexity to the problematic, because of course, is it a dream telepathy, is it like just a precognitive, what is it, right? But yeah, we were doing this kind of study, and actually we are going to continue this kind of study, and we have done this with, as I was saying, photobiomodulation. That's the device that we have developed. So it's a device that does everything. So it does measure your brain state. It does benchmark your brain state, and it allows as well to induce lucid dreaming and induce certain of the perceptions that we can have at the onset of out-body experiences. So that's really a little bit of the idea of the device. And we can see here there are lots of devices that were trying to induce lucid dreaming. All those devices here were trying to induce lucid dreaming, and those devices here are very good device, by the way. This is a dream device, and this is a Muse headband that measures sleep with quite some good accuracy, specifically this one, although now it's not sold anymore. But they don't do they don't measure non-ordinary states of consciousness. And so what's next, really? So we need to understand better the neurophysiological correlates of OBEs, because we don't, or remote viewing, because also we don't. As far as I know, I have seen only 3 studies that have, and they are old studies, that have some data with EEG that were published in peer-reviewed literature. Because what we need is that we need to look at what is it that we are looking at in terms of the brain activity. Is it something that is close to meditation? There are some books that say, oh, you need to be in a open meditation instead of a focused meditation. You need to let it come to you. Okay, but is it open meditation? If you see open meditation, they don't have remote viewing. It's something else, right? So is it like a flow state? You need to be in a flow where you need to perceive things. Yeah, maybe that's the case, right? But again, we need to be able to pinpoint those conditions. And we also need to look at the phenomenology of that. And for example, for me, when I'm remote viewing, I have mostly achieve it without CRV. So it's more like it was done initially by Swan. It's like it's like the perception there, and if I start talking, I stop it. So I don't have this capacity. And so it's again, it's very different from my out body experiences, but it's clear that is, you know, it's perceptual, is visual. But again, for me, it's very, very difficult to talk. But again, that would be different from, you know, someone that is very proficient at doing CRV, right? Because the person there has that condition where there is a little bit of vision, there is a little bit of intuition, there is a little bit of a control of the mind. So maybe there is those conditions where we saw, you know, the beta activity there that is superimposed in the alpha activity, where the person is possibly thinking and writing, but there is this alpha occipital activity. And so we need to differentiate all those, you know, kind of states with OBEs as well, because we don't see. And so we were starting to do some research with the INSNOE, the Institute of Swiss Institute of Noetic Science, with some gifted subject. This guy here is a guy that has, you know, done some really interesting, has had some really interesting, you know, perception. He was able, you know, out of 100 tests of OB perception to achieve, you know, 78 image correctly. But again, here is not remote viewing, it's all body experience. So the person is not at all, at the moment where the person is out, is not perceiving the body. It's losing sight of the body. But this person is also able to do remote viewing. And so what we have seen is that, again, there is this kind of, you know, occipital activity. So what are, you know, the differences between, you know, all those states that seem to be, you know, a little bit entangled? And that's really interesting, because in that study that we were talking about of Persinger's 2002 study, they were talking about what they call the PGO kind of, you know, brain wave that are generated in the brainstem. And they were thinking that this 7 hertz activity was associated with, you know, those PGO, called PGO kind of wave, which are activity, which is a very specific activity above 20 hertz that is generated by the brainstem, and that is very specifically perceived during dream imagery or during REM, right? And so again, what is the relationship? In my previous article where I talk about, you know, different conditions of associated with all body experience, I said that, you know, the brainstem was really, really important. But hey, we need to study this more. And for example, another question that we may have is that, to which degree is it similar to mediumship? Okay, so of course we know it's completely different, you know, it's remote viewing, but when we are there and we are perceiving some things, are they certain kind of, you know, neurophysiological correlates when we are there, you know, that we perceive intuitively that are more medium like than remote like? Because we know that all those states, for example, this guy is able to do a little bit of everything. And so that's what, you know, I think we are all gifted in some ways to achieve those conditions. We have those, I mean, naturally, and we can do more and certainly control. For example, myself, I have had hundreds and hundreds of out-body experience, but it's only, you know, when I started looking a little bit more at RV, I knew remote viewing, but I started developing remote viewing naturally without even, it's when I was trying to go out of the body that certainly I was like, hey, but this is remote viewing, right? And so I was like, well, but hold on a second, I'm developing this because I'm trying out body experience. I was trying to induce an out body experience, but I was getting the remote viewing, and those things happen. and I'm sure that some remote viewers have experienced out body experience, you know, even if it was, you know, very quickly, and sometimes even without perceiving, because sometimes the out body experience can be very quick. It's like if we are there and we come back. But anyway, we can discuss a little bit more about all those things, you know, and there are lots of, you know, questions that I have about all that, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Rodrigo, thank you so much. That was very interesting. Usually the way we do it, people put their hands up electronically to cue
Mhm.
us to let them know that they have questions. And then I'm going to be on for a couple of more minutes, so I'll be glad to take the questions. Does
Sure.
anyone have anything?
And if you guys want to turn on your cameras, that might make it easier to have a discussion too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was such a fascinating and wonderful presentation. And
Thank you.
one of the things that struck me is the complexities here, where I was really happy to see like that you were talking about there's different kinds of meditation and each kind may have a different effect. And I think this is where it's so complex. And then with remote viewing too, like you have CRV and ERV, but then even like within CRV, you know, someone in one stage might be in a different state than another. And some people are like, people aren't consistent, right? Like some people are spending most of their time in stage 3, where you're doing movement commands and kind of imagining yourself to be out. Some people may spend another time, some people may be deeper or, you know, less deep at different times. So with all of this going on, where I guess it comes down to inconsistencies and differences, you know, how do you get a consistent effect? That's would be the question.
Well, I mean, if I knew, then you know it wasn't. It would be easier to achieve those states. But I think that, I mean, within the complexity of the brain, we have to remember there is a complexity of the human being inside of that condition, and I think that that's what is seen. What I like the most in CRV is that it's structured a way for us to be more rational, between brackets, right? Be more pragmatical, better saying, about our own perception. And I think that if we would be able to achieve, a higher set of recordings of within those different kind of settings, natural remote viewing, extended remote viewing, and CRV, then we would be able to exploit those data to be able to focus and see what works. Here we are just seeing, how can I say, a highlight of certain conditions that may predispose a person that has more consistency, as you were saying, to achieve better results, right? So we were seeing that, when, the remote viewer were more consistent, more, precise, there were more consistent alpha wave in the activity of the occipital area, right? And so, well, the study doesn't show, but there were moments of those peak of, activity, those peak of activity of beta activity. Do they enhance those perception, or is it like, the person, spend like, 5 minutes and is like, doesn't do anything and sees, like the guy that I was showing, Nicola, he just like is out of the body, he goes there, he perceives, right? That's what we want. We would ideally want with, the remote viewing. But again, everyone will have a different predisposition. And when we have those beta activity, then we have to ask ourselves, is there a condition that is more mediumistic there, that is like, more intuitive, or what it is? Or is it those gamma waves? We do association of ideas. I know that association of ideas generally is not, the way to go in remote viewing, but, and we don't see this, but again, we see that, within the complexity. So sometimes people will, have those gamma wave when they do a kind of association and they are spot on in the intuition. So we'll need to have more data to be able to pinpoint, the different characteristics, because we know that gamma wave is associated with those eureka moments and those intuitive moments. So are they completely overcome in, the process of, remote viewing? Maybe they are. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. And then
Jimmy, Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Rodrigo. A couple of questions occurred to me. One of them, I was very fascinated by the ability of the computer to reconstruct images that one is seeing based on based on the brain patterns. It seems like there's an immediate application of that to remote viewing, and it might be more amenable to certain remote viewing methodologies. Like extended remote viewing is supposed to be more immersive and involve more imagery. And so I could imagine developing the technology to the point where you could actually capture motion video of what someone in an ERV state is experiencing, which would be fascinating. And especially if you have correlates like we know the person is perceiving more accurately when the gamma spikes, then that would target which places in captured video should be the most accurate, and that would be a tremendous help in data collection and evaluation. I did have a question about, so you indicated that a lot of your efforts have been directed towards out-of-body experiences, and on the training side of thing, or the induction side of things, y'all have been seeking to use technology to induce out-of-body experiences, and you mentioned that you'd had some success with that. Did I infer correctly from one of the notes I saw on the screen that with the participant who you have been able to induce out-of-body experiences, that this individual had veridical out-of-body experiences, so that data that he didn't naturally know could later be confirmed, which would indicate that the OBE was successful rather than just an imagination?
Yeah, that's correct. So we had, one of the participants, I have been doing those, stimulations, different types of stimulation, different types of, electrical stimulation we can use. And so in one of the occasion, the person was able to perceive her mom. I don't remember exactly the circumstance. I would have to look at my notes, but it was her mom. She perceived her mom, and she thought her mom was having a kind of a sleepy, she was sleepy in the sofa or something like this, and she was thinking of her. So there was something like this. And then when she, after, the protocol, she mentioned this, I record everything, and, to as a pilot, you try to record everything to try to see and measure and have ideas. And then I was like saying to her, so you have to talk to your mom to verify. And she was, after she left, she verified with her mom. She said, yeah, my mom was exactly at the time, having a kind of a nap in the and she was thinking of me. So it was that. But yeah, I mean, the out body stimulations that we are using are quite effective for people who are already achievers of the out body experience. So let's say, for example, you are like already training, then those stimulations, they help you to achieve the best that you have achieved so far. And so that's quite interesting, because it doesn't induce, at the present moment with the stimulations that we are using, we were using 25% of the power that were used in some other tests. So it was, it's like 1/4 of the power. We are not hammering the brain with it, but people are already having some type of experience. And so the idea to use technology is just to help. We don't want people to be dependent on technology. We want this to be a kind of a tool to improve, to enhance our own abilities. We want people to have their own abilities and develop this by themselves, for themselves. But yeah, technology has everything, can help or not. But we want technology that is able to help.
One more question, and then I'll surrender the floor. I know there's a debate in out-of-body experience circles about whether something actually leaves the body and travels to the destination, or whether it's just a shift of perspective, which would make it more like remote viewing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know OBE experiencers who are on both sides of that.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you come down as someone who's had OBEs?
Well, it's both, right? It's not one or the other. So you can experience both. Sometimes what's happening is that you leave the body, but you are formless. So that's one condition. And sometimes you leave the body and you perceive, a kind of a metaphysical body. And sometimes that metaphysical body, that, astral body, what they call, you don't even perceive it. You don't have the, it's so subtle that you really need to focus to be able to perceive. And sometimes it's very clear, it's very dense. So you see, it's like most of the time in life is not one or the other. You have many possibilities. And so we have to look at this in a kind of a spectrum of reality. And that, but I propose, I'm proposing, or I'm defending the idea of an objective body. But it doesn't mean that it's always like this. And the objective body is you're able to perceive this very well when you start to have, out-body experience from the onset. When you start to perceive the exteriorization, that's where you perceive really, the astral body. But for example, when I'm having a remote viewing, it's completely different. But that's, again, it's not always the case, because I have had a Brazilian medium talking about this, where he saw like some kind of a trump going out, like if it was like going out, but he could perceive the body, right? And he could perceive even, sense presence, like a little bit what was described by, Swan. So he could perceive spirits, but at the same time, he was like perceiving something going out. But so, look, we have to remember, we don't know a lot about all those things, and we need to be, more critical, more how can I say, cautious about all those things, because as humans, as the species we like to put things in box when we don't understand the nature of reality, and much less consciousness, right? And so, yes, I think that both are clearly indicated by the phenomenology. I'm a phenomenologist, I'm a neuroscientist, and I like, to study neurophenomenology. So when we look at this, and then we can go back and say, hey, okay, what's happening in the brain? What are the differences in the brain? And so that's what it's interesting. But yeah, it's very clear when you have an out-body experience that, you can be physical or not at all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Deborah, I'm getting ready to jump off, but before I close, I just want to make sure you're the host. If I end this meeting, it's not going to end the entire meeting for everyone. If it does happen, we'll invite Dr. Montenegro back to continue the discussion. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you.
Rodrigo, thank you so much for joining.
Thank
This
you.
has been amazing. Everybody, thank you for being here, being present, and adding to the conversation. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
You too.
Thanks.
Deborah, you're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. Yes, it looks like Doug King has had his hand up for a long time, and he was our guest speaker last month. So I'm so thrilled that you're back here. And yes, what is your question?
Okay, thank you, Roderick. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
It was very fascinating. And I think I have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
One is that you mentioned about the gamma spike, and they're measured as high as 200 hertz. So
Yeah.
I'm an electrical engineer, so I'm pretty much interested in the signal part of that. So for the 200 hertz, and what was the fastest the sampling that you have had in your EEG?
Mm-hmm. So we were using 500 hertz or 1000 hertz, but from when we were using 1000 hertz, we have downsampled it to 500 hertz.
Oh.
And so that's a very good question, because we don't know if it goes higher than that, right?
Okay. So
because of the Nyquist equation, we are maxing at a little less than 500.
Yeah, and then in the field literature slides that you presented, I think that from the TAR, so the brainwave, the spectrum of the non-normal states, they are very sharp, very sharp. So do you have an idea of what's the bandwidth, the spectral bandwidth in terms of hertz? How narrow are those the spikes?
You are talking about the alpha blocking that I was mentioning?
Alpha blocking or any blocking that just gives you a very sharp the peak. So it's I guess the current EEG might not have the signal there to make I'm just thinking that if it 1 hertz wide, 0.1 hertz wide, or 0.01 hertz in terms of the frequency bandwidth. I'm just wondering, do you have a data on the lowest one?
No, because it wasn't very much. Those articles, where this is coming from, is very old, and so they were not like so precise in terms of everything associated with the electronics of the EEG. And so I mean, the spike there were at, if I remember, they were at 10 hertz, but they were going from 9 to 11 or something like this, but there were no precision in terms of exactly, and we don't know the sampling rate. There are lots of information from an engineering perspective that we don't know in those studies. So this is why I was mentioning that there is a lot of limitations there that is associated with the studies. And of course we need to do this with proper EEG and repeat those things and see.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, and then let's see, next, I think next was Dale. Dale, you're on mute.
Okay, some years ago, in working with remote viewers, I had the impression that the individuals experienced remote viewers that felt they had intense sight interactions, to use their term, was very similar to a later or more intense form of lucid dreaming. So I felt that these tended to converge at those particular levels of perception. So I don't know if you've done a lot of work with the lucid dream phase other than the OBE that might overlap into that. So I'm curious about that. I'm also wondering about the dream yoga tradition, whether or not you've dug into that, and I'm sure you have, to see if there's any particular insights from that ancient tradition that has informed your work as well. I'm curious about that.
Well, I mean, it's a good question. Those are good points. The truth is that we don't know much about the remote viewing state. If we would have a study where we would have a 256 EEG, then we could have a much better perception of whole brain, and even look at source localization to have a more precise perception of what's happening inside the brain, to see if it looks like something like dreaming or not. At the present moment, I would say it would depend a lot on the remote viewers and their ability. What kind of remote viewing? Is it the natural one? Is it CRV? And I would say that those different modalities would probably lead to different neurophysiological correlates. I'm particularly interested into those perceptions that are purely achieved, like if it was like a kind of a dreaming. But dreaming is very different from what I experienced myself from a subjective point of view from the remote viewing. Because remote viewing, I'm having this, it doesn't have the characteristic of the lucid dream. Lucid dream is dynamic. you are not necessarily always in control, but you control certain aspects of it. And because there is a lot of confusion in today's, community of lucid dreaming, they think, oh, you control everything. No, you don't control everything, because it's a dream. It's a physiological mechanism. It has, some very specific correlates, and you control certain aspects of it. That's the reality. You have a certain level of metacognition. You have a certain level of awareness, but those, they fluctuate, right? But again, the characteristics are much more dynamic in terms of, the imagery that comes if I compare to what I have when I'm having a remote viewing. My remote viewings are very specific. It's like if I am in a highway and I'm following something, right? I am like going somewhere. I am like, and I'm still in contact with my body. I still perceive my body, but that's the perception that I have. Is there. It's going somewhere, it's seeing something. And so it doesn't have that tribulation, that, crazy imagery that you have during lucid dream. And so to come back to the gamma waves that you were referring, those are, again, they are seen in, the dreaming state. So the lucid dreaming state specifically has, is perceived to have like, 40 hertz, has a characteristic, specifically in the frontal temporal areas, because those are the areas where you have like association of ideas. Like, for example, if you see your mouse in front of you, there is a mouth, your brain, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is, is the association cortex, is going to know, oh, this is a mouse. And so, there is a name. And so that activity requires, that area of the brain to be activated, and specifically more activated during lucid dreaming. And so, and it's not during dream. This is why, if you see, your mouse in the dream, you are going to be afraid of it, and it's going to transform into something else, because you don't know what it is. You don't have the access to the words, to the meaning, right? And so we see that there is an increase in gamma wave in those lucid dream, and those, Tibetan dream yoga. That's what they were trying to achieve. They were trying to achieve those conditions of, lucid dreaming. And so my opinion is that it may be, more or less the same. So it's a lucid dream. It would be lucid dream independently of the technique that you're using, although there are different types of, characteristics of lucid dreaming. And again, for the gamma wave, what is interesting is that, I forgot to mention this, there was a study by Charles Starr that was studying in the 60s, OBEs, and then one of the subject, Miss Z, had, the perception of 5-digit correct, number when she was lying down under a EEG, and that at that moment they perceived gamma wave at 60 hertz, right? So again, I would say we don't know enough to be able to say.
I just had one more comment. I think a lot of that depends on the set before, what your intentions are. If you really want to have a lucid dream that doesn't have the variations that you're talking about, sitting around here and there, and have it very precise, that can happen.
Oh, sorry, you're cutting out. Could you repeat?
Yeah. Okay.
If you are having a lucid dream, you said the intentions.
Yeah, the intentions beforehand, I think, can set the stage more or less, so that you have a high degree of stability, and it's not that imagery is floating around and changing on you. But it can match very closely if you're doing a target somewhere. It can match very closely to that target. But I think a lot depends on the pre-session set, the pre-dream set. This is what you like to achieve, and you focus on it, and then you will have that type of remote viewing like experience within the lucid dream.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I'm not sure I understand everything, but from what I gather, is like you are saying that you can have a lucid remote viewing within a lucid dream.
Yeah.
Oh yes, yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Yeah, and that's again, this is why I was saying that there are different forms of lucid dreaming. Because sometimes you can lucid dream, you're aware that you're lucid dream, you have a out body experience, or you have, a lucid dream and you can have a remote viewing. Yeah, that's definitely.
All right.
Okay, next let's to hear from Dean, and after Dean, we'll hear from Laura.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you for the talk. Very interesting. I'm new to the remote viewing field, but I have a degree in Buddhist studies, which I took in a Tibetan Buddhist context. And they are very keen on, it a little bit relates to what Dale was saying, they are very keen on the framing of the practice, on the framing of the meditation, and that it should be undertaken with compassion and for the benefit of beings. And I'm becoming aware that there's sort of like a military connection with remote viewing's sort of Western origins. And I'm just kind of interested what your motivation is in studying it.
Well, my motivation is mainly to understand the brain and to understand, how we can evolve as a species in terms of, understanding that we are more simply than, the brain and specifically that we have so many, capacities. As I was pointing out in the beginning, my first slide was, from William James, who was saying that we are underdeveloped. We have much more capacity that we are not, using, and we are underperforming, and we have much more in terms of, the capacities that we have. And I think that's what's missing today. We see, for example, in social media, people debating, like if they are, the rulers of, the world and they understand everything, when we are more monkeys than anything else. We are more emotional than rational. We are more limited than evolved. And so you can have, non-dual states, and it's beautiful, and I have them. But I think that we have to put ourselves into our own feet and see that, we are just peering, we are just starting to understand all those things. And of course, intention is fundamental here. We are not doing this to be egocentric, to spy. We are doing this to, perceive, who we are better and understand who we are better. And I think that's, the right frame of mind to do this. It's for the good of humanity. I've look in 25 years doing OBEs, I've never been to anybody else's place without asking them first, right? So in my, even friends of mine that were, say, oh, you have to visit, and say, okay, can I really? Because I will come. And so that's the right mindset. That's the right, way to do it.
But then to follow up on that, if you create a machine that anyone can buy and use.
Yeah, but it's like a knife, right? I mean, a knife, you use it to cut your butter or you use to kill. It's what can you do? If the knife exists, the technology is there, someone is going to develop that. So the problem is not technology, it's not AI, it's not, what is what you do with it. Has always in life, the problem is moral, is ethical, right? I mean, if I develop something, to develop a capacity that is inherent to humanity, I'm setting, something that is positive with, the objective. Of course, I can use a pen. You take someone that is a martial art expert. You can use the pen, the mighty pen, to kill someone, or you can use the pen, just to sign a beautiful, poem, right? So the problem is not the pen; it's the person that used the pen. So.
Yeah. So, and I'd like to just say welcome, Dina. I'm really glad that you're joining us here as a new member and remote viewer. And there are at least a few people here, including myself, where we use remote viewing to help with missing person cases. There's so many missing people, missing pets, missing belongings. And one of the problems that we have is we know that there's a mixture of correct and incorrect data in any remote viewing session. And if you read the research that came out, Dale can definitely speak to this because he was part of the government programs for a key part for so long. And any study you see does show that there's a mixture of correct and incorrect. And, that's not so much a problem if you're just doing an experiment to test Psi to see if it's present. But if you're really wanting to make use of it, how do you deal with that there are some incorrect elements? And if people are relying on your data, it's a problem that they can't be confident about everything. So if we had a way where we could really consistently see brain patterns showing that, say like 90% of the time when someone has been accurate with a piece of data, that the brain fires maybe in a different way when they're not accurate. I don't know if we'll ever really get there, but if we had that, then we could have more confidence and, in those pieces of data and, then invest resources, because for investigations, people don't want to invest a lot of, go out, and if someone says the body is in a certain city in Ohio, you don't want to invest, $50,000 to send a team out there where it turns out it wasn't Ohio, it was another state. So that's where I can see these connections. But
thank you.
Laura, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I just thank you so much for this presentation and talk.
Thank you.
I especially appreciate that you replicated the Voss study, because I had heard a while back that it hadn't been replicated. And as a lucid dreamer myself, I really like to see that stuff like that can be replicated. And I love that you're studying like the intersection of lucid dreaming, OBEs, and remote viewing, because they're intersected more than people think. It's like I started out with lucid dreaming, it was just that, and then it's like I see people asking online all the time, did I remote view? And I'm like, no, you can't do that without intent. And I'm like, you might have had an OBE, you need more. People are trying to, they want to know what they experienced, and it's like, that's for you to decide. And when Dean was mentioning that they were into Buddhism, I thought of Charlie Morley's work in lucid dreaming and integrating the Eastern and Western traditions. So I was just mentioning him as a resource for Dean. And I also thought of Graham Nichols, who's also in the UK. He is you might have heard of his work. He is a...
Yeah, I know him personally.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
I know both.
Yeah, I figured you might have some insight to that, because like he's a research subject, and he's spoken at IRVA conferences in the past. So yeah, that it's great that you're working with him.
Well, I'm not working with either of them, but I know both of them.
You know of their work.
Yeah. Oh, well, I know them personally, both of them, and I know their work, both of them. Yes.
Yeah, no, because they're in the field too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've only been interested in like Psi since the pandemic, and that's one of the things the pandemic brought me that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Started to get into remote viewing and that sort of thing. Oh yeah, Dean had a question in the chat. That's Graham Nichols with 2 L's. Just look him up. He'll be on he spoke at an IRVA conference in the past.
Oh yeah, I haven't been looking at the chat here, so you'll excuse me for that. I don't know if Deborah, you are going to put those questions there on the.
I've been keeping track of them. And,
okay, cool.
Yeah,
Thank you.
In fact, that's why I raised my hand. Liana has posted a couple of questions, and so I'm going to read them on her behalf. The first one, she says, other than correlates of visual perception, have you tried to detect or AI process correlates of attention or focus on a target?
Well, no, because I haven't been doing any target kind of work. So those I have proposed, to do so for, a few grants that I have, requested in the past, and they were refused. But yeah, we want to do this going forward for sure. I have now the possibility of having a team US team from a US university with a partner institution, another university in Brazil, that are looking to do this, and we are currently talking about the possibility of doing that. So in this case, of course, we are going to look at those correlates. But yeah, when we look at the brain, depending on the type of electroencephalograph, EEG that we use, we are going to look at the whole of what's happening. And so the idea is, like, because we know so little about all those states, we need to look at those, and we need to look at everything that is associated. So what are the neurophysiological correlates? So we see something that is associated with attention. If we see something that is associated with visual, then we're going to look at the statistical results of those experiments, and then we will take it from there, right?
Liana's second question is, have you tried mapping activity in the reticular activating system across many sessions of experienced viewers to look for unusual signatures compared to ordinary levels of attention?
No, the reticular activating system is too deep into the brain to be able to really have, a proper analysis with EEG. So there are models that we can use that are associated with what we call source modeling, or source localization, or source geolocalization, which will be able to statistically, mathematically, infer into where this information is coming from deeper layers of the brain. But I haven't been doing this with that study that both studies that I'm doing with the OBE, with the gifted subject. We are going to use that type of technology, source localization, and MRI. So what we're using, we are using the data, the anatomical data of the brain from an MRI and the EEG, and we're going to cross-correlate both to try to see what's happening more deeper within the brain. And I'm going to do this with the remote, the vibrational state study as well, where we're doing a 256 EEG. But yeah, I haven't been doing that. No.
Okay.
Not yet. Anyway.
Okay. Also, just want to, and that triggered a thought in me, which I'll just mention. I hope that you and your colleagues are able to map which portions of the brain are associated with which psychic functions, because one of the big untestable theories currently in parapsychology is when super psi is really the explanation for something. Like, maybe a medium is not talking to a dead spirit, maybe they're just telepathically or remote viewing that information.
Oh, and sorry, you're cutting out. So maybe the medium wasn't talking to a spirit, and then it cut.
But the medium was instead using psychic abilities like telepathy or remote viewing to pick up on the information and just interpreting it as a spirit. But if we had a precise mapping of which brain regions are associated with which psychic functions, then that would become testable, and it would be possible to establish whether super psi is responsible for a particular effect or whether it's something else. So I wish you and your colleagues best of luck in figuring that out.
Well, that's, yeah, I mean, you see, that's the point of, phenomenology, right? At the present moment, I mean, and in neuroscience in general, we cannot do neuroscience without phenomenology. So if we are, for example, even when we talk about, for example, let's say delta wave or slow wave, those slow wave are mainly known or perceived during sleep, but it doesn't mean that they don't happen during the waking state, right? So we need to map, the phenomenology with the neurophysiology, and that's what's missing at the present moment. So this is why we have a lot of people, a lot of neuroscientists, my colleagues that are saying, oh, out-body experience is dissociation. And what I want to show, what I want to demonstrate is cannot be dissociation, because the neurophysiological correlates are not the same, because the phenomenology is not the same. But the problem is that we need to do this for remote viewing, for all those things. So, and it's even more complex because those things, they imbue themselves. So for example, sometimes I'm trying to go out of the body, like I was saying, and then I'm starting to have a remote viewing, and then only afterwards I have an out-body experience. So we need to be able to disentangle those states between themselves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see, Dale, and then Ging again. Dale, you're on mute. I think he's looking.
Yeah, got it. Fine.
There you go.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so the devices you're working with and developing, ultimately, you might be able to have an individual improve the ability to perceive a certain imagery. So I'm just wondering, at some point in the far distant future, I would think, that you have to grapple with the issue of the interpreting and knowing what the perception was. But because just seeing an image doesn't mean that that was the correct interpretation. Too many things look alike. So there has to be a differentiation at some point in order to really apply this. Like Deborah was saying, things are wrong, but a lot of times they're wrong because we have named things. But the image itself may be correct, basically correct, but you have to go beyond the image and match that image with a meaning. And here, all kinds of havoc can occur because there are different roots in the brain, I would imagine, with different links to interpretation, which many of them would be probably incorrect. So I'm just wondering if you thought about that.
Well, well, yeah, exactly. It's a very long-term problem because as we in the slide where I was, mentioning, that fMRI research where they were able to basically correlate, a visual image that was, perceived and then, interpret and then have an interpretation of what was.
Mm-hmm.
And they have only 84% of reliability. So I think that from an EEG perspective, this kind of technology is going to happen 10 years from here. And it's, before we have an application, it's going to be possibly, 20 years. So I'm not even worried about that. What I'm worried about at the present moment is like, having subjects that are really good at what they do in terms of remote viewing, whatever, but that would be, natural remote viewers or, CRV remote viewers. I mean, we need to have, a data set. All those things, by the way, they work with a lot of data. So we need to have, more experiments. We need to have the funds, to be able to do this type of research, because then we can start to look at, the certain of the research that has been done that I was showing to see, is that true? Is that correct? Is this factual? Can we improve on that? What is exactly the neurophysiological correlates we are seeing in high achiever, under which condition and phenomenology?
Well, you've come to the right place as far as finding subjects, because you have so many very experienced remote viewers here, but also there's a lot of people here who, in addition to being remote viewers, they're mediums, they're clairvoyants or energy healers as well. And so you could almost kind of just, say, pull up a few qualities you want. Yeah, you have a large selection. So then maybe it does just come down to funding or how you can, because I know you need to have people there in person, and this is very expensive with the equipment you're working with.
Yeah. I mean, the problem at the present moment is not the equipment, because I have, I have most of, the equipments that are necessary for that at this stage. But yeah, the problem is mostly funding.
Yeah.
So we are halfway there, let's say.
All right, Deching.
Yes, thank you. So I know it's already pretty late in French, but I'd like to just bring another perspective. As you mentioned about the missing link that I think every one of us are trying to find, I would like to project this in a slightly different angle, which hopefully will make some sense. So this technology inducible non-normal states, that seems to be a condition, precondition of achieving either OBE or remote viewing whatsoever. So there is a condition that it needs to get there. And then this technology inducible process looks to me pretty much like how a dye, a red dye or red the sapphire can lace under the feedback. That's how laser is being developed now. And many materials we didn't know before that they could bring light into a very, very coherent state. To me, this technology inducible process to bring the brain wave into either gamma or theta or very coherent, it looks to me it's that similar process. We just use feedback, maybe there are Monroe's that ear set, or maybe breathing, or maybe some different techniques, but just try to repeat that until my brains, or maybe somebody's brains, just they fire in a very coherent way. And then this brings people into that particular state that is very, very tricky, but when people reach that state, somehow, some kind of information portal opens up. So that's my view of this from an engineer physical view, okay? But that's something that I see that there is definitely a connection, but I'm working, that's something that I hope eventually I can explain that in a better way. But I just want to say that do you see anything that's there that's valuable that you hope that I hope to get some feedback from you, and maybe that's if that is true, I would project that like your gamma spikes or whatever spikes you are going to get, it's going to be extremely narrow in the spectral band. That means that would be beyond what current EEG can measure. You need to go much higher frequency to measure that. So that's why
I don't know about that. I don't know about that, but we have to remember that the novel, electroencephalogram, they have, sampling rate of 1,000 hertz, 1,000th of hertz. It's a lot, right?
Yeah.
And so look, I mean, we don't even know where we are going and why we need this. I mean, myself as a neuroscientist, I have absolutely no clue why they need so much. But I mean, if it's there, we're going to explore that. So I think that at the present moment, we're just scratching the surface in terms of, everything that is associated with that and everything that is associated with understanding, the brain for this. And I think that the more we understand it, the more we're going to see, those capacities, and the more complexity we'll add to the understanding of it, because you will see that a person specific like me maybe will have a very different correlates because I'm doing this for 25 years than another person that is starting with it. So there are so many different iteration of that research, but we need to start somewhere, right? And so I think that at the present moment, for example, for the gamma waves, those are seen a lot in the frontal and the temporal lobe for certain things. And so you have other states, like for example in meditation, you have in the parietal lobe on the top of the head. And so look, I mean, it's no meditation has, I think Deborah was saying, it's similar. You have meditations that induce theta wave, you have meditation that induce alpha waves. So again, so it's different types of states. We are I would say, look, I mean, I can't consider myself honestly someone that has read a little bit the literature, but the more I read, the less I know, the more I see that we have a lot to learn and a lot to explore.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear from Coral next.
Hi. So
Hi.
Just a little bit. Thank you for that absolutely wonderful talk. It was really, really interesting. I've been a remote viewer for 20 years, but I, like many other remote viewers, came to remote viewing because we realized we were dreamers, we were precognitive dreamers, and then worked on lucid dreaming from there. One of the things I do to enhance, apart from I use a neurorhythm, the OmniPemp neurorhythm.
Yeah, I know them, yeah.
I use that in theta, for my remote viewing. I think David's here, and I know he does it too. He uses theta. You can use different frequencies, but I also regularly use something called the Lucia light experience machine.
I know them both. Yeah,
that's from Austria, and I've done it. I use the DMT program on that, and I've had my brainwaves read while I'm doing it by it's called an eductor show. It's a biofeedback.
That I don't know.
That's an extraordinary, it comes from Hungary, and it's an extraordinary machine because it can also feed back. So it can give you healing frequencies. It can also help you. It has a remote viewing frequency to enhance your brainwaves. But I've had my brainwaves read while I'm doing the DMT on the Lucia, and it's extremely active. I've seen the chart. It's like off the wall. But it really does, I believe, I mean, I do it to just fine tune every now and again. So I really believe it helps me. So I really think I can't wait for your machines too.
Thank you.
I really think they'll be very valuable. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, great. Does anyone have any other questions or any final words you'd like to say, Rodrigo, before we move to our next activities?
No, myself, no. I think we were pretty much thorough, and thank you again for inviting me. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, and feel free to hang out still. We have about 30 more minutes. And so what we tend to do in these meetings, when either after a speaker or when we don't have a speaker, is we're talking about different projects that we're working on or that we're in the process of developing. I have a couple things to cover, but I also want to see if there's anybody else who has any project and that they would like to discuss. And for those that are new, this could be like a brand new idea that you just want to kind of like raise and see if anyone has any ideas, or it could be, you're already completed a project and want some guidance there. Jimmy,
just to let you know, Deborah, that it's very late here for me, so I will. You have to excuse me because it's midnight and I have to work tomorrow. And but it would be a pleasure to meet you guys again and participate a little bit more into your meetings. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions, or if you want any advice on any neuroscientific thing. I will be happy to help.
Rodrigo, could you put your email address in the chat before you leave?
Oh yeah, I will do that. I put my email. Good night, people. Have a nice talk. Nice to meet you. Take care. Bye bye. Thank you. Bye bye.